Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha.
You know, he was coming at it from a standpoint of utopian, visionary futurism, and maybe it was a good idea, maybe it wasn't.
Right.
It's fascinating to consider.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, he was coming from a good place in a utopian idea, but it ended up looking like a containment solution. He had a quote that I think about a lot, is that dare to be naive, which was like sometimes when you're too naive to realize something's not possible, you can actually end up achieving it.
On the campus of Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, the curve of the Earth stretches 40 feet in diameter. This version of Earth was designed as a geodesic dome by the inventor R. Buckminster Fuller, and it is, of course, much smaller than the planet we're standing on. Today, more than 50 years after its construction, the dome that Fuller built is going through its own kind of climate crisis, and a new effort is underway to save this miniature of our planet and preserve the legacy of its boldly forward-thinking, eccentric creator. Here to talk with us about the future of the Fuller Dome and why the legacy of R. Buckminster Fuller remains important to this region and the world, we welcome Benjamin Lowder. He is the director of the Fuller Dome Center for Spirituality and Sustainability. Benjamin, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Benjamin, before we talk about the climate crisis inside the Fuller Dome, give us a bit of an introduction to the structure that's on the campus of SIUE. What is special about the Fuller Dome in Edwardsville?
Sure, yeah. So it was originally built in 1971 by Buckminster Fuller, who was a professor at SIU Carbondale and Edwardsville at the time. He built it with his architectural partner, Shoji Sadao, and it was a realization of an idea that he had for decades that he called a geoscope, where he wanted to create a miniature Earth that you could go inside of and have this vantage point of looking out from the heart of the planet up at where you're standing on the actual planet. Mm-hmm. It was really informed by his desire for people to have an accurate worldview. Yeah. A globe, of course, is the best model for the planet, but you can only see one hemisphere at a time.
Right,
you have to rotate it. So you make 2D maps. He also patented a 2D map, the Dymaxion map. But this idea is, well, if you could go inside of the globe and look out, you could see all of it at once.
Mm-hmm. Now, the dome is an example of a geodesic dome.
Yes.
Desic, depending on where you are.
They're both acceptable.
So what does that mean?
So, it is the turning of a three-dimensional sphere into a lattice of triangles that replicates really the way nature builds. Mm-hmm. And it is the most efficient means of enclosing a volume of space architecturally, in that it uses the least amount of materials.
Okay. Now, the Edwardsville Geodesic Dome has R. Buckminster Fuller's name, right? Tell us, Benjamin, a little about Fuller and how he's associated with that dome.
Sure. Buckminster Fuller, he's really hard to categorize. Some people refer to him as an architect or a futurist or an engineer, but he didn't actually hold any licenses as an architect or engineer. He was really an inventor and an author. He has 28 patents. He wrote over 30 books. He was born in 1895, right, at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. And he was born into a family that has a long history there around Harvard, going back to his grand-aunt, Margaret Fuller, who was among the Transcendentalists. She was the editor of The Dial.
Okay, right.
Rubbed shoulders with the likes of Emerson and Thoreau and them. And he said that despite the fact that she passed before he was born, that her legacy had a huge influence on his life.
Okay.
So he was a guy who wanted to understand the operating principles at work in nature and have inventions in human-created objects informed by those operating principles.
Now, R. Buckminster Fuller, he died in 1983. Benjamin, that means you never met Fuller yourself, but back in 2018, you appeared on our show alongside Fuller's daughter, Allegra Fuller Snyder, who was then 91 years old. Here's a bit of what Allegra had to say when asked to talk about who her father was.
He was a very wonderful and challenging man. He was always a step ahead of where the rest of us were, but very excited and eager to bring us all with him. He was a very outgoing person. He felt that all of us were incredibly empowered and that we each really had the capability of really making major changes, not only for ourselves, but for everybody else.
That was Allegra Fuller Snyder, daughter of R. Buckminster Fuller. Allegra passed away in 2021. Benjamin, does Allegra's description of her father resonate with you, even though you did not meet the man yourself?
Oh, absolutely. And just hearing that clip, I mean, it was really touching considering that she has since passed away. She was a wonderful person in her own right, dance ethnologist. And yeah, I mean, she said it brilliantly right there, that he wanted to see what one human individual could do if they dedicated their lives towards trying to make the most good, for the most people with the least amount of offense to the environment. And all of his inventions and all of his writings are outcroppings of that goal.
And how is it that you yourself became interested in and then so closely connected with Fuller's work?
So I was a student at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, and that's where Bucky was a professor. My father had went there. It's a beautiful campus set near a national forest. It was very appealing. And I encountered his legacy there, but didn't have a very deep appreciation for it there, at 17, 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
It's a round building instead of square. Oh, that's novel. But I didn't really understand the deeper philosophical underpinnings behind that legacy until I designed and built my own house in a sustainable way, aligned with seasonal sun angles, and learned about the geometry that governs natural growth structures, and then an effort to restore his home in Carbondale. Reached out for help with brochures and communications and graphic design, which I was doing at the time. So coming back to his legacy after having that experience of designing and building a home in cooperation with nature gave a deeper understanding and a new context for his legacy. And I was ready to champion those ideas, and Bucky's legacy is the perfect way to do that.
And so Bucky gets to this point that I'm curious about. Fuller did not invent the geodesic dome, but he still became famous for that design to the point that it's called a Bucky ball. Why?
So, the Zeiss lens company in Germany actually built one on top of their headquarters before. He was the U.S. patent holder of it. And, the Bucky ball that you mentioned is actually the carbon-60 molecule, which is a geodesic or geodesic lattice, and it's one of the primary building blocks of all organic life. So it was named after him as a Bucky ball or the fullerene. But there's unquestionably did more than anyone else to educate, promote, and popularize and help us understand the importance of that geometry as a crucial and integral piece of natural architecture that governs all natural growth structure.
Yeah. We need to take a quick break here, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
Now back to our conversation with Benjamin Lowder, director of the Fuller Dome Center for Spirituality and Sustainability at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. Now, we're here in part because of an effort that is underway around the Bucky Dome. And it is facing right now an existential problem, a kind of internal climate crisis that's thrown the structure's future into question. What's the short answer behind what's going on?
So the old 50-plus-year-old antiquated gas boiler system in the dome needs to be replaced. And that's a heavy lift financially for our organization. So that's really just the first step in a larger project of greening the dome. Mm-hmm. In 52 years, it's received very little capital improvement because it's actually a separate organization from the university. So it's, the university is a partner, but we're self-funded. And, and extraordinary expenses like this require some extraordinary effort to try to raise these funds. Mm-hmm. And we want to take this opportunity of, the burden of having to do all this capital improvement as a pivot towards greening the dome as well, which it would be in alignment with Bucky's legacy.
Yeah. So, insofar as not making these updates, was it mostly about there not being the money to do it, or was it also kind of driven by an idea of preservation that sort of kept it in a place where you couldn't really update?
It is not on the National Historic Register. His Buckminster Fuller's home in Carbondale is. That was the first organization I started working with, and this structure received a recommendation from the state of Illinois that it would be a good candidate, but the idea with this is a simultaneous preservation and demonstration of contemporary best practices around sustainability. So, the history of the building through a kind of almost hand-to-mouth existence there, supporting different religious practices on campus, was underfunded. So it was a blessing that it did preserve it in a sense. It is a kind of a time capsule from 1971. Mm-hmm. So that's great. Yeah. But it's time, the roof has to be addressed, the HVAC system has to be addressed, ADA accessibility has to be addressed. Mm-hmm. And all of those things were turning into opportunities to do a green roof, to do a plaza that would create an outdoor amphitheater kind of space that would help with the ADA accessibility, add some solar fields to create renewables. Mm-hmm. But the university has told us that our current boiler system will not make it through another season. Yeah. So the first step is to stabilize the building for the winter, and then we have a team of internationally renowned architects, engineers, and some university officials collaborating to create a master plan that will be made public in 2024. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so not too long from now. Insofar as sustainability, that is, how does sustainability, as we discuss it today, and some of the things that you've described, how does it compare with the way that sustainability was thought of by Fuller in the 1970s?
He was approaching it from a design science standpoint, that we can create tools and technology that will allow everyone to operate in a more efficient way so that there will be enough to go around for everyone. I think that the thinking around sustainability has grown and evolved somewhat about the energy efficiency of the building, not just the amount of resources that goes into its construction, which he was primarily occupied with.
Yeah.
But how does that building perform after it's built are the things that we'll be addressing with this this greening plan.
Yeah. And so you do see then that the currently proposed upgrades, they do fit sort of within Fuller's vision?
Absolutely. And it's great to be able to have the relationship we do with Buckminster Fuller's family. Jamie Fuller Snyder and Alexandra May, his grandchildren, or Allegra's children, have been involved in the early stages of this plan, because we're kind of trying to channel, like, well, what would Bucky do given today's technology, today's resources? And, one of the interesting things about the dome there in Edwardsville is, with it being a miniature Earth, and it was this geoscope idea. Like, the ultimate vision that Bucky had for the geoscope was that it would be a place not only to have that accurate worldview, but to communicate data about global resource consumption and population distribution. So he proposed one for outside of the UN that would help us kind of create synergies on a global level.
Yeah.
One very simple thing, like one hemisphere is at night and one's in the day. Energy consumption, those two different hemispheres vary. If we had a global electric grid, we could manage our resources much more efficiently across the globe. A bit utopian, considering where we're at with nationalism and things, but definitely worthwhile. And, given that, we could use the miniature Earth dome to project onto, model sea level rise. What would the coastlines look like? There's a lot of opportunities given today's technology that could help realize Bucky's vision of what a geoscope is.
We're talking today about efforts to save the unique geodesic dome designed by R. Buckminster Fuller, which currently sits on the campus of Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. We're talking about the dome, its legendary inventor, with Benjamin Lowder, who's the director of the Fuller Dome Center for Spirituality and Sustainability. Now, the globe that is on the SIUE campus isn't the only example of Fuller's impact or his fascination with geodesic domes. And in fact, from about 1960 to 1971, he and his wife Anne actually lived in a geodesic dome in Carbondale. Benjamin, tell us about that. I mean, what do we know about how comfortable that was for them?
The building, like I mentioned earlier, is now on the National Register of Historic Places, and it's been restored. And his family donated a lot of the objects back to the dome home, and it's open for tours. So we can see exactly for ourselves, and it's very comfortable. It's a modest little home, and it was actually built as the first kind of demonstration of these low-cost, easy-to-build homes that could answer the post-World War II, need for housing. And it was the only house that they ever owned their entire life. In other places, they were renters. But it's a wonderful, cozy little house, complete now with furniture that Charles Eames had gifted him. Ruth Asawa, one of his students at Black Mountain College, had a sculpture in there. A wonderful circular loft library that now has his own personal books back on the shelves that you can see what he was reading. So it's a great, wonderful little home.
Yeah. Now, Fuller's former dome home in Carbondale is on the itinerary of an upcoming tour on August 19th. And that tour will take people to several examples of Fuller's geodesic domes in this area. The tour will also include a structure that folks who've been to the Missouri Botanical Garden here in St. Louis may already know, and that's the climatron or at the garden. What other domes will people get to see?
So in addition to the SIUE Geoscope Dome and his dome home and the climatron dome, there's another one over in Wood River that's really incredible. It was built by the Union Tank Car Company as a place to service train cars, and it's nearly 400 foot in diameter, 120 feet tall. So at the time it was built in 1961, it was the largest open-span structure in the world, meaning that that's the thing about geodesic domes. They don't need any internal support, no posts. So if you want to have a giant crane lifting up train cars and rotating them 360 degrees without bumping into a post, a geodesic dome is a perfect solution for that. So it's owned by Watco now, and they're still servicing train cars in it.
Okay.
But it's an incredible, disorienting space to go into. There's no other space like it on the planet. Another one is over across the river there in East St. Louis. It's the Mary Brown Center, and it was built as a demonstration of geodesic domes there for the community to see and have a town hall meeting for a project that Bucky proposed along with the Afro-Caribbean modern dancer Catherine Dunham from East St. Louis for a mile-wide geodesic dome for East St. Louis, which would house 120,000 people. And it was done in cooperation with a working group at Washington University, and they had a meeting there in 1968 about this idea for a mile-wide geodesic utopian city in East St. Louis.
So I'm trying to imagine what it would have been like to hear about this plan. I mean, was it ever realistic, and what did the public think about it?
Well, there's a famous meeting, and I talked to some of the people who attended that meeting, in particular Bill Perk, who we also lost, and who was one of Bucky's colleagues at SIU Carbondale. He passed away recently. But he was there, and it was a challenging, difficult meeting. I think in hindsight, there should have been more bottom up instead of top down community involvement, and rather than this single luminary genius providing a living solution for an entire community whom he didn't necessarily have the same lived experience with.
Right.
But he was coming from a good place in a utopian idea and trying to provide this kind of beautiful communal living environment. But it ended up looking like a containment solution for a community that had problems.
Right.
And people in the community who saw it in that way stood up and kind of raised those questions and felt like it was a way to, basically drop a dome over East St. Louis and say, you could round everybody up if you wanted to, or shut it, and those were realistic fears, given that very few large-scale housing projects have ever been successful. But he was coming at it from a standpoint of utopian, visionary futurism, and maybe it was a good idea, maybe it wasn't. Right. It's fascinating to consider.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I understand that you recently found some records that show that Fuller had plans for even more domes in this region, like #domination, if you will. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was doing some research out at Stanford. That's where the Buckminster Fuller Archive is, about this region and SIU. And I come across a project that I hadn't been aware of. It was for a 400-foot diameter, 3/4 sphere geodesic dome for the SIU Edwardsville campus that would have been called the World Resource Inventory Center. And it would do this thing of modeling global inventory of resources and consumption, but convey that information through holograms.
Oh.
So, which the technology didn't even exist.
Right.
And it was a $20 million project in 1972. So I don't even know what the math would be on that today. But he was always a futurist, always ahead of the curve. Ideas like that sound grandiose, but it's a good thing to dream. And he had a quote that I think about a lot, is that dare to be naive, which was like sometimes when you're too naive to realize something's not possible, you can actually end up achieving it.
Yeah, right.
And his life really kind of follows that arc.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like that step ahead that Allegra was talking about there.
Absolutely.
At least with the holographs. Now, Fuller is often described as a futurist, and he believed humanity would have to find a way to thrive with renewable energy. What do you think Fuller would think, looking at our world today, and how close are we to a future that Fuller would approve of?
Well, decades ago, he was saying it was touch and go. and we were at a crossroads to choose either utopia or oblivion. We have not heeded his warnings in a lot of ways, and yet it is optimistic around technological advances that he was so keen on with his ideas around design science. New fission, fusion, energy. I think those things he'd be very interested in. I think he'd be very disappointed that we haven't achieved the global cooperation that would allow everyone to kind of live in this level of abundance rather than competition, of haves and have-nots. One thing like that global energy grid, that was something he was advocating for, but seems so very far off, where we would have to cooperate with, say, Russia across Alaska and things like that. So it's not too late to look at his legacy for inspiration, and it becomes more relevant with each day's passing news cycle, I think.
Benjamin Lowder is the director of the Fuller Dome Center for Spirituality and Sustainability on the campus of Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. Benjamin, thanks so much for being here today, and good luck with your current endeavors.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski,
with audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.